Now, while magic isn't real and children don't get a letter on their 11th birthday admitting them to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry no matter how long you wait and how much you cry and... It's
okay, Ron. It's alright. It doesn't matter.
Anyway, magic may not be real, but the wizards behind the Harry Potter VFX team come pretty darn close. And although not all the visual effects hold up, a vast majority of it still looks, in the words of Ron Weasley,
bloody brilliant.
In this video, we'll take a look at the series before CGI and how exactly the production team brought the wizarding world to life. Let's go. The Harry Potter series ended on a massive crescendo, with Harry going toe-to-toe with his greatest nemesis, Lord Voldemort, with Harry eventually besting the Dark Lord once and for all. The fight is an epic moment on film, but the behind-the-scenes is, well, a little less impressive. Take, for example, the actual moment Voldemort dies for good and is all like, "Mr. Potter,
I don't feel so good,"
and breaks off into little pieces. It's a little underwhelming when you see how it was shot, with actor Ralph Fiennes' regular face being shot with little dots on it before the VFX team worked their magic. For Voldemort as a whole, CGI was used on his face, as the VFX team played a game of Got Your Nose and replaced it with the familiar snake-like nostrils.
He doesn't have a nose!
The final battle sequence was shot on a set in front of a green screen with the actors miming using the magic because, again, it isn't real, and wind machines being used to make it all look more dramatic. Also, as Voldemort's Death Eaters run in, their charge also looks a little less impressive, as they look like a bunch of football hooligans running and miming firing off spells. A number of magical creatures in the series were a mix of practical and visual effects, and while the Dementors were for the most part CG, they did also have some constructed for certain scenes, with them attached to an arm and then lifted to make it look like they were floating. But for the other scenes where the Dementors were interacting with the actors, such as the moment Harry and Dudley are attacked by the freaky creatures in Order of the Phoenix, other methods had to be used. For this scene in particular, actor Daniel Radcliffe had to be suspended on a seat that went between his legs and, to be honest, doesn't look all that comfortable, while the Dementors were then added in post. Like the Dementors, the Basilisk was also a blend of practical and special effects, with a full-size practical basilisk mouth being created, measuring up at 30 feet long and jaws 3 feet deep. The model could even slither up a track to get close to Harry in the fight scenes, and could actually move so they didn't have to rely too heavily on CGI.
Wicked.
But of course, there were multiple instances where CGI was needed, and it was also used for touch-ups on the practical model, while Dumbledore's Phoenix Fox was also predominantly CG.
Amazing! This is just like magic!
Quidditch is probably one of the greatest elements of the wizarding world, and I am still bitter that they cut the World Cup final in Goblet of Fire.
I'm gonna kill him!
To pull off the Quidditch scenes that did make it into the series, the brooms were suspended, usually via strings, with the actors on top of them, also usually attached by strings, and were then shot in front of a green screen, with wind machines used to make it look like they were actually soaring through the sky. Whether that be over a Quidditch pitch, I think it's still a pitch, over the streets of London, and even in Ron's case, dangling helplessly from a stick high above the ground.
Hold on!
I can attest to this firsthand, as not to brag here, but I got my photo taken at the Warner Brothers studio tour on a broomstick in a robe in front of Hogwarts, and I still have it hanging on my wall. It's awesome. As you know, people can't see Thestrals until they've seen death firsthand, so seeing as Harry hadn't seen a death before Cedric, except for his parents, but that apparently didn't count, he didn't see the Thestrals until the 5th movie. For the Thestrals, a head was created for the actor's eyeline and so that they had something to interact with, while the full body was then added into the scene in post. Some life-sized models were created for certain shots, but the wings were always 100% CGI, as they would be pretty difficult to make for real. Hagrid's half-brother Grawp was also another one who was both a mix of VFX and practical models, with the emphasis predominantly on CGI. Like the Troll in Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone, depending on where you're from.
Dobby, shush, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you or anything.
The visuals of Grawp do look kinda dated, but at the time, the VFX was cutting edge and the Potter crew were pioneers in the industry. The actor behind Grawp was motion captured on a soundstage wearing a suit with white baubles to track his movements, whether that be reaching for a butterfly or picking up Hermione, with a doll being used to replace Emma Watson, as it turns out that it's easier than shrinking her. However, to shoot the scene with the actors in the Forbidden Forest, a member of the crew would wear a blue suit with some scaffolding attached and a ball placed at the top to indicate where Grawp's eyes would be.
Just stay away from her, alright?
Now, we already mentioned the chief inhabitant of the Chamber of Secrets with the Basilisk, but to actually create the chamber itself, the production team had to use more CGI than you might have realized. To create the set, pools of water were created on either side of the walkway, with a fountain on one side shooting water down. But the far walls in the chamber were green screen and were where some of the movie's lights were located. The Ministry of Magic was another one that was also mostly green screen, in terms of the far walls anyway, although there were some structures created for real, such as the arch-shaped hallway where a number of the Ministry workers enter via flue powder and the central sculpture. The phone booth that Harry uses to enter the Ministry was suspended via wires and then lowered down to the floor. The set was then filled with hundreds of extras to make it look like a real, living, breathing place of work. While for the most part, Hagrid was filmed by having actor Robbie Coltrane shot from certain angles to make him look larger than he is, in certain scenes it was impossible to make the actor convincingly look like a half-giant. This meant that on occasion, a stunt double would step in for Coltrane wearing a large suit with a giant, lifeless waxwork Hagrid head on top, with the digital movements of Coltrane added in post. An example of this is the moment that Hagrid carries Harry— oh, that's weird to say—
I shouldn't have said that. I should not have said that.
Another instance where Coltrane was replaced by a stand-in was the moment that he was tied up by rope moments before in Part 2, but instead of an actor, a life-size model was used for the scene. For House Elves, Dobby, and Creature, a mix of VFX and practical effects were used once again. For Dobby's introduction in Chamber of Secrets, the character was entirely digital, and a tennis ball on a stick was used for Radcliffe to know where Dobby was supposed to be in a scene. But as the series progressed, actors such as Diane Gibbons were kitted out in motion capture suits to make it look more lifelike, while in cases like Dobby's death, a model was used so Harry would have something physical to cradle in his arms, with VFX then being used in post to create the final version of the Elves. Now, when it comes to the famous Triwizard Tournament, I just have one thing to say.
Tell them!
In the books, it says that Dumbledore calmly asked Harry whether or not he put his name in the Goblet of Fire. Not
Harry Potter! Harry, you put your name in the Goblet of Fire.
Alright, seriously though, the tournament was predominantly filmed in front of a green screen, with sets like the final stadium and the platform where the contestants dive from all being in front of a screen with them diving onto a green mat. The scenes where Harry is underwater were shot in a large water tank in front of a blue screen, with a team with oxygen tanks swimming beside him so that he can actually breathe while shooting the scene. For the dragon scene, blue mats were located on the ground so Radcliffe could jump and land on them safely, while the scene where he slips down the outer wall of the castle was filmed with the actor attached to strings and then falling onto a blue mat. But of course, the dragon Harry fights was totally real. I'm kidding. It was obviously CG.
Come on, have you? Took you long enough?
For the legend Buckbeak, the hippogriff was also a mix of practical and special effects, with 3 animatronic models being created, one standing, another rearing, and a third lying down, with every feather of the model having to be individually inserted and glued on by hand. And the crew were apparently applying feathers to the model up until the cameras started rolling. For other scenes, Buckbeak was basically all CGI. Take, for example, the moment that Harry and Hermione fly him, which was filmed with them sitting on a mechanical bull in front of a, you guessed it, blue screen. Now, I know this isn't a Harry Potter entry, but we thought we would add it to the video as it looks pretty cool. To pull off the moment where Newt Scamander climbs into the suitcase in Fantastic Beasts, the top of actor Eddie Redmayne and his left arm were in costume, while his bottom half and right arm were in a green suit so they could be shopped out in post, meaning that they didn't actually pack Redmayne into a suitcase, which is kind of disappointing. Speaking of green suits, in the scene where Hermione is handed books in the library, to pull this off, members of the crew were on the other side of the bookshelves, their arms and hands wearing green fabric, with them handing the books to Hermione to make it look like it was magic. Well, I guess it is movie magic after all. And finally, while Hogwarts was a digital model by the end, in the first movie, the school was a physical model and measured some 50 feet across and consisted of more than 2,500 fiber optic lights. The model is available to see at the Warner Brothers Studio Tour in Watford and is truly a sight to behold.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Divine.